So, Professor, let's stick on the path of emerging economies, commodity cycles, and natural resources. Please, you can invite your guest right now.
Very good. I'm so pleased to invite my two friends that will continue the conversation, that we will be closing the day. I have my dear friend, Prime Minister Lionel Zinsou. Good to see you here again. Thank you very much to be with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much, Otaviano. Very good to see you again.
A pleasure, João Bosco, and congrats on the event.
By the way, Prime Minister, where are you right now? Just for me to know.
I'm in Paris.
Are you in Paris?
In Paris.
Okay.
I share my time in between Africa and Paris.
Must be very cold now in Paris.
Yeah, it is cold.
Well,
absolutely.
Enjoy the cold weather. And you are right now, Otaviano, where are you now?
I'm in Potomac, Maryland, the great Washington, D.C., where I live.
So you are in Washington, I'm here in Brazil, and the Prime Minister is in Paris. Now, what we're going to have is a discussion about how the economy, in the last 5 years, the world is facing a dramatic moment. The emerging markets, the emerging economy needs to reinvent themselves, and I know the role, the importance of natural resources is something that we have to put in a very pragmatic way. I'd like to hear from both of you. I will start with you, Prime Minister Lionel. How do you see, in the last 5 years, the importance of natural resources for countries such as Benin, such as Brazil, and other places? How do you see the natural resources as an opportunity to economically recover in such countries?
First, I would like to thank you really for the initiative of this event and inviting Voices of Africa. To your question, there is a paradox. The paradox is that we were, in terms of a cycle of raw material prices, in a difficult situation pre-pandemics. And it became even worse during the pandemics, especially for mineral raw materials. We had a serious problem of relative prices and terms of trade for oil and hydrocarbons in general. And it is a very important export resource for Africa. And same with metals and other minerals. And that since 2015, the second half of 2014. And it created a major crisis in some producers. For instance, Nigeria was in recession pre-COVID. For instance, the 14 other countries relying on oil and gas for their exports, their currency supply, their fiscal, their tax revenues, it was a very difficult period pre-COVID. And it became a bit worse, to the point where some countries like Zambia, which is very dependent on on copper first, or Nigeria, Angola, were in a dramatic situation in the middle of 2020. And it's not only because, for instance, oil and hydrocarbons in general represent sort of 20% of GDP in Nigeria, the largest in terms of population and GDP of the African countries. It's not that it is 20%. It is that in terms of exports, revenues from exports, it's more 85%. And in terms of tax revenue, it is something like 90%, 90. So the imbalances in those economies were a dramatic situation. Conversely, the ones where natural resources are more based on agriculture, so more diversified countries with a better impact on job creation, because you have some manufacturing, you have a lot of logistics, and it is quite labor intensive, which is not the case of mining and hydrocarbons. Those economies have been sort of booming pre-COVID. So we cannot only speak of raw materials in general. The minerals are one thing, agricultural produce, natural resources coming from the countryside, which are sort of 25% of the GDP of the continent, and very often more than 50% of the labor force, it was another story. Now, post the first waves of pandemics, all the prices of raw materials are going up very sharply. And if you take a country like Nigeria, recession is behind them. Now they have a far better situation in terms of relative prices, in terms of tax revenues, because of the price increases, the inflation on minerals. So paradoxically, the recovery in the world creates some shortages, then changes the relative prices of materials, and today it will be one of the most important engines in the recovery. So we are not exactly like countries importers of those raw materials. So for us, the inflation in prices is good news, not inflationary pressures and a limitation to the recovery. So the mineral resources as the agricultural raw materials will be two engines of the recovery. That is a very clear difference with some countries, but I think it is, in a sense, closer by the Brazilian experience than the European experience, for instance. And what is important for us is that everybody in Africa, north to south, east to west, we are completely clear that the priority now is to manufacture, to transform, to convert raw materials in finished products in the interest of job creation for the youth. So it became the most significant priority, because through the pandemics, the logistical shortages and disruptions have created a feeling that we were not at all the masters of our destiny. We have
Prime Minister.
to manufacture. Thank you.
Yeah, Prime Minister, I will come back to you about this transformation coming from raw material to finished product. We'll come to this later. Otaviano, the outlook that you can bring to the commodity market. I know you are very close to this specific topic. You are writing, you are talking very much about the needs of diversification of the commodity market. How do you see, not only in the Africa context, but globally, how do you see the outlook of the commodity market? But also, I would like to link what the Prime Minister just mentioned about the importance of the raw materials to the recovery of the economies. If you can digest in these 2 points, I'd like to hear from you.
All right, thank you, Bosco. It's a pleasure to be here. And Prime Minister Lionel made a great ground for us. Let me do the following, trying to be complementary to him. To give, as you suggested, a look at the what lies ahead in terms of commodity markets, so as to make possible a differentiation that is quite important, as he himself referred to. People have spoken about the possibility of a new super cycle of commodity price, but I will call attention to the differentiated situation among the groups of commodities. And then my second point, I would say something on how our current pivot of the world economy towards clean energy, towards the energy transition, has specific impacts on some commodities. And I will finalize trying to say something about the diversification that we referred to. First, stylized facts regarding commodity markets. The first one is the fact that indeed energy price have surged over the past 3 months, especially natural gas and coal price, while most non-energy price have plateaued following steep increase earlier in the year. Adverse weather has buffeted many commodity markets. Unusually high summer temperatures increase demand for electricity. Droughts reduce hydroelectricity supply, as it was the case in Brazil, and affected some agricultural commodities, while floods impacted the supply of some metals and coal. Most prices are expected to ease in 2022 as supply constraints ease. Second, stylized fact, the crude oil prices continue to recover from the lows of last year, with Brent crude oil averaging $82 a barrel in the first half of last month, as well pointed out by Prime Minister Lionel, well above the pre-pandemic level. Of course, this has to do with the fact that the oil demand has continued to recover. It is now something close to 3% below its pre-pandemic peak. And while the production was also slower to pick up than expected due to supply disruptions and capacity constraints. And also, oil prices have been supported by surging natural gas prices, as oil is becoming increasingly competitive as a substitute in heating and electricity generation. Third, stylized fact, natural gas and coal price soared, with spot prices in Europe and Asia reaching record highs, driven by rebounding demand and stagnant supply. The electricity production from renewable sources also declined in several countries due to drought and low wind speeds. This is to point out that the transition towards decarbonization will be a road full of bumps, but we have to persist on it. Fourth, stylized fact regarding commodities, the agricultural commodity price stabilized during the third quarter, but they remain at their highest levels since 2013. Declines in some food price, for instance, rice in response to good yields in Southeast Asia, were offset by higher beverage prices, especially coffee due to frost in Brazil. But in any case, after several years of below average growth, grain and oilseed supplies are expected to grow at historical levels in the current 2021-22 crop season. That's why one may take the stability of agricultural prices in 22 as a likely trend. Fifth, stylized fact, quite important in this regard, is the fertilizer price surge. The rally in energy price, especially coal and natural gas, have sharply increased agricultural input costs, including fertilizers, which have risen more than 55% since January. High energy prices force some chemical companies to halt or reduce production capacity, But the rising input costs, along with the emerging La Nina, pose significant upside price risks to agriculture, while with ambitious biofuel targets may boost some grain and oilseed price in the long term. And finally, as far as stabilized facts, and that gets me to the point that I want, the base metal price continue to rise, even if iron ore prices plummet. After reaching an all-time high in July, iron ore prices have since fallen rapidly, driven by China's reduction in steel production in order to meet the zero growth targets for the year. In contrast, most base metal prices continue to increase, driven by the global economic recovery, while production has been disrupted by energy shortages and lockdowns. Just to give an idea, tin price have reached all-time highs amid strong demand for electronics. Aluminum and zinc price have also been boosted by high energy price, which saw some metal refineries reduce or close production. Second point that I want to make and relates to that is the implications of the world's historic pivot toward curbing carbon emissions. Some analysts, including myself, started to speak of the possibility of a new commodity price supercycle after the downturn since 2011. But although it's always possible to find moments of growing fluctuation in which commodities remain for a long time above or below their long-term trends, difference among them matter. In our current case, metals are king. It is in metals, especially copper, lithium, cobalt, and rare earth ones, that a strong bullish cycle is most evident, because the world's historic pivot toward curbing carbon emission is likely to spur unprecedented demand for some of the most crucial metals used to generate and store renewable energy in a net zero emissions scenario by 2050. A resulting surge in price for materials such as cobalt and nickel would bring boom times to some economies that are the biggest exporters. Although, of course, soaring costs could last through the end of this decade and could delay or derail the energy transition itself. Price for industrial metals, an important foundation for the global economy, have already seen a major post-pandemic rally as economies reopened, as we mentioned. Just to give an idea, lithium used in batteries for electric vehicles could rise from its 2020 level around $6,000 a metric ton to about 15,000 late this decade and stay elevated through most of the 2030s. Cobalt and nickel price would also see similar surges in coming years. The point is that a concentrated supply of metals implies some top producers may really benefit. Usually, countries with the largest output have the greatest reserves and likely would be major prospective producers. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, for example, accounts for about 70% of global cobalt output and half of reserves. Other standouts, of course, include Australia for its lithium, cobalt, and nickel, Chile for copper and lithium, along with Peru, Russia, Indonesia, and South Africa. So a long-lasting metals could also bring substantial economic gains, especially for the large exporters. I've seen estimates, for instance, from the IMF, that a persistent 10% rise in the IMF metal price index would add an extra 2/3 of a percentage point to the pace of economic growth experienced by metals exporting countries relative to importing ones. Which leads me to finalize to two remarks. One, of course, geopolitics will keep coming to the fore because all major economies are trying to extend their clout in commodity markets. And in the production of metals and rare earth are different from producing agriculture and oil. And to finalize, more than ever, the challenge to make sure that natural resource wealth becomes a blessing rather than a curse that we have addressed here many times, and Libraf has made discussions on this, will be more important than ever. The governance of the countries has been such that the appropriation of the rents coming from this boom in metal prices and other commodities has to translate itself into supporting domestic infrastructure and in being invested in education of the population, and also eventually helping finance, provide long-term finance to the other lines of production towards diversification. That's the way by which the circumstances of mineral wealth would translate itself into a blessing for the country rather than a curse. Thank you.
Very good. Otaviano, thank you very much for everything that you mentioned, the outlook that you gave us. We are just about to finish, but I cannot leave you without bringing you a very important and direct question. I'll give you 2 minutes for each one of you to give the recipe. I'm coming to you, Prime Minister. You have 2 hats. The hat as politician, as a Prime Minister, and now you have the hat of a businessman leading Southbridge Group. So if you have 2 minutes to give the recipe, how to transform raw material like oil in Nigeria to richness, to transform the economy of the country. 2 minutes, please.
First minute to comment on what has just been said. You have a question of income distribution. You have a question of sharing in between various constituencies, populations, regions. If you take a country like Nigeria, the local province where the oil is extracted in the delta, you have a rebellion, armed rebellion, because of the inequalities. So the very first question is a social one. Second question, second minute. In Africa, 2/3 of the population have no access to energy. In countries exporting crude oil, you have to import the value-added products, refined products. So for Nigeria or Angola, the number one import constraint is to have no refinery capacity. And the oil is the number one import, not only export. We absolutely have to transform our raw materials locally. It's a question of mobilizing more equity. And that is true also for renewables, which is essential for the population. That is true for the forest and the carbon financial market. And there, we have everything to learn from Brazil. Everything in terms of renewable, in terms of forestry, in terms of agriculture combined with industry to create new fuels, new energy sources. So we have a huge effort of knowledge and equity. That's the financial side of it. And we start to see far more financial resources that we can mobilize. So 1 minute to say, really, value added is the question. Knowledge is the way to go ahead. Brazil is 20, 40 years ahead. We need to jump together on those issues of transformation.
All right. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. You mentioned Brazil is 20 years ahead, and I understand, Otaviano, his capacity to analyze how Brazil can help countries in Africa. 2 minutes, Otaviano.
Well, basically, it's not by financial resource. That's not the main vehicle to which Brazil can help Africa. But the transfer of technology, the experience that we have acquired as a country in uplifting, in getting, for instance, the science-based agriculture that we have, the ability to produce, to produce on natural resource with a lot of technology. This is some area in which Brazil can help our friends and partners in Africa. Just in a nutshell, if I would summarize in a sentence what has to happen for the natural resource wealth becomes clearly a blessing. The countries in Africa, for instance, or other natural resource rich countries should tax the the extra gains made possible by the boom of price, and use that money in well-crafted projects, public projects of investment in infrastructure, minimally energy access, as the Prime Minister highlighted quite well, but also whatever, sanitation, public investments that benefit a broader part of the population than those directly involved in the natural resource wealth exploration. And education is basic, complemented by programs of support, public support to poor people, and making the business environment one friendly to investments in areas that go beyond the simple natural resource exploitation.
Good. Thank you very much, Otaviano. I would like to stay here the whole day, but I'm so sorry. We started in the morning, and we had so many ideas, my dear friends, Prime Minister and Otaviano. And I understand what you just brought here could be a movement to transform what we start to say in the morning, in the afternoon as well, transforming ideas into actions. I'm so pleased to have had the conversation with both of you, and I learned too much, and I know the audience had the opportunity to enjoy very much the conversation. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to see you two again in one of the sessions of the Brazil-Africa Forum soon. Thanks again.